So with the performance at DreamHack Open Stockholm, Cloud9 will yet again attend another Valve Major here at Cluj, where they hope to return back to their old ways of being able to make it out of groups and actually make it into the playoffs, something that the last couple of times they've attended the Major has not been the case for certain players on this team, particularly Skadoodle, who has had a pretty brilliant career outside of Valve Majors, has been to several of them, but has never made it out of groups. He hopes to finally, jump that hurdle. And then someone like Freakazoid, who has only been to a couple of majors, kind of, had a huge stint not competing and, recently came back around May or so. So only been competing again and has really only been competing seriously in CSGO for this stint with Cloud9. So over the past 5 or 6 months, he also hopes to make it out of groups for the first time in a major. And so there's a lot riding on this, I think, for Cloud9. There's a lot of people in the community who expect Cloud9 to kind of be the one to carry the banner for North America based on what some of the core of this team has done in the past, but also just pretty recently in July, where they had this really big run of tournaments of getting into 3 finals in a row and 3 second place finishes and 4 top 4s if you include the season 7 SEVO finals. So performance-wise against international teams on LAN and player history, this is the team that everyone kind of feels, classically should be able to do it. Obviously, Liquid's building up a lot of hype with some of their online results in the NA scene, as well as, I guess, some of their results internationally lately have been better than in the past. And so there's a lot of hype kind of surrounding this particular team and what they're doing. CLG is always a team that has been able to, get some best of 1 wins here or there against top European teams and kind of be a team maybe on the brink of finally breaking through. But Cloud9, like I said, they're the one who historically people kind of rely on and count on, and so this is their next chance to try to see if they can't live up to their name, so to speak. So I won't go too much into their run of second place finishes. I think that has kind of gone into the rearview mirrors, so to speak, in the sense that we have a lot more recent results to look at, to where looking at those is a bit out of date. But it is worth noting that not so long ago, just 3 months ago, this team was in fact playing very, very well. They had their second place finishes at that season 1 finals for ESL ESEA. They had their championship match against Navi at ESWC 2015. We had them beating Fnatic and going on to play TSM, but losing in the finals to face at stage 2. And so I bring this up only because some of the building blocks of that run do still exist on this team today, though they're not getting the same results, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. Their most recent lands that we've seen them play at are in August. We saw them play at the last major, which is ESL 1 Cologne, and at this event they were knocked out in the groups after having beat Mouse on Overpass. They wound up losing the Virtus Pro on Kabul, and then they get eliminated in a pretty upsetting fashion by King1 on Dust 2. Fast forward a bit, they go to Dubai, only play a couple of maps here because of the format of the tournament. They lose to Envy, pretty close game on Kabul, but lose to a NIP team that many people have felt have kind of fallen off for quite some time now. They lose to this team in overtime on Dust 2. After that, we see them actually qualify for Cluj with no real issue. I mean, they 2-0'd Rocket and 2-0 Dignitas. There wasn't much of a story there. They didn't really struggle a whole lot. I guess they did kind of struggle actually a bit more than expected against Rocket on Dust 2. But the other 3 maps they played at this event pretty much went according to plan, given their abilities on the particular maps that they played, and given who they were up against. I think maybe the only real surprise is the fact that Cloud9 actually were able to finally win an Inferno game, which seems to have been a huge rarity, as that has classically been a huge rough patch type of map for Cloud9, but they were able to get past it into Dignitas. And then we have their most recent performances, right, which just earlier this month in October, we saw them travel over to Australia, in which case they lost to Immunity. But unfortunately, I don't have so much information on that. I didn't get to watch it live. I haven't been able to find any VODs or demos of those games, or even any stats coming from those games. So if anybody out there has that information or knows where to find it, please let me know, because I don't like to just make crazy conclusions without information. I kind of pride myself on actually doing the research and watching the games before I make these big comments on them. And so I don't want to, harp too much on it because I don't really have the information. But we do know that that result is there, and it was a disappointing result. And then some of their NA results here lately over the past week or two, when I'm recording this, have been a bit rough, losing to Conquest and Liquid on a couple of occasions. But overall, their results are still okay. I think they're like second place in the ACA with a 9-3 record. They're still definitely in the running and face it to make it to that next LAN. So the results aren't too terrible, but I guess a couple of recent losses have started to put some doubt in people about Cloud9. And so let's kind of talk about some pros and cons of the team, and we'll also maybe look a little bit at some of these results a bit deeper as I make some of these points. First off, one of the big positives for the team, which I kind of alluded to already, is that the building blocks that were used to put together this big run in July of all these, finals, placements, those building blocks are still there. And what are those building blocks? Well, I've mentioned them in some other vlogs. I don't want to go too in depth. You can check out some of my other Cloud9 videos where I really get into it. But one of the building blocks, of course, has to be Sean Garrett's leadership. I mean, ever since Simphis left, he's been the firm leader of this team. He filters information much better. He is the decisive caller. Everybody knows about his ability to scout opponents and anti-strat. And so people know that's a strength of his. But I think some people read too much into that and feel that it's his only capability. Whereas I would say he has a pretty diverse playbook. And it's not as if an anti-strat he designs against one team on one particular map can't be used somewhere else. Of course they can be. There's going to be other scenarios where that particular tactic he might use to counter someone here is also going to work to counter someone elsewhere. And so I would say that he's also pretty good at reading things mid-round. If you give him a man advantage, like an early 5-on-4, he's very good at manipulating that into a win. When you get his team into closer, 3-on-3 type situations or whatever, they usually play themselves out of those quite well, especially on the terrorist side. So I would say this in general, he's a great tactician. He's the best in-game leader right now in North America, in my opinion. And so that is a huge building block for this team that is still there. I think that other role things that have happened with this team and the positions that they play has also been a huge building block for them. I think Freakazoid being the firm entry fragger for this team, role-wise, has been great. His individual performance has certainly fluctuated between games of having games where he's in like the mid-20s to games where he's barely breaking double digits. So that can kind of even be a con, that inconsistency. But him playing this particular role has set up everyone else so well. For example, this has allowed Shroud to kind of be a secondary entry fragger. Where he plays very well. I feel like you're getting the most out of Shroud by having him in that particular position where he's not the first man in. Some maps he kind of is, especially like on Long B platform, on Cobble, or sometimes going up mid on Inferno T side. He can kind of be a main entry force there. But other maps, like playing Door on Cash, for example, or even some different runs. I already mentioned Cobble, but there's sometimes Freakazoid does lead and he comes behind on a Long B hit. Point is it gives him information with someone else going in first, allows him to have better intel on where he needs to be looking when he comes out, and he has really good aim, and so he can hit some nice shots as secondary entry fragger. He can also be a great CT player for this team with his ability to hold positions and have that good aim, and so that's been great for them. Someone like Shroud to be that guy for them, be that main rifler for them. Obviously, the star power of Scooter's op has been a huge building block for this team, which is still there. He's one of their most consistent players. He's a great opper, and that's really helped them out in a huge, huge way. And I would also say that because some of these roles are so firmly in place, with Freak so firmly an entry fragger, and Sean being kind of a lurk support player outside of being the IGL, of course, and Ska being the main opper for this team, and Shroud kind of being able to be, a secondary entry fragger, this allows Nothing to be a bit more loose and a bit more of a wild card. I think that's something he's always wanted to do, but it's been a burden on the team in the past because there are many different points in time in Cloud9's history where Nothing needed to be the entry fragger for the team because no one else was really capable of doing it or was doing it because Simphis was moving around roles so much and just whatever. It seemed to be kind of a big mess. And now he doesn't have to be that because you have Freakazoid serving that role. So now he can be a bit of a wild card. He can be kind of a player on the extremities, sometimes playing lurking roles, but he can also be a guy to take into a site. on different situations. So I think that because you have everyone else so locked into what they're doing, it allows nothing to be a loose player, but it doesn't burden the team. Like it works out just fine. And in fact, his performances have been some of the best they've ever been his entire CS:GO career since he's been fulfilling this role for the past, 5 months or so. And so all those building blocks are still in place. The roles on the team, the skill that they're getting out of people, especially like Shroud and Skadoodle, the fragging trio of nothing. Shroud and Skadoodle has been noted throughout their big run as being a pretty solid one. And so all that's still really there. I would also say one of the other big positives for this team going into the majors, the fact they finally gotten some time off. And so, I mean, their travel schedule has been super ridiculous lately, so this has had wear and tear on their physical health. We've noted some players being sick at different periods of time. That's been huge. But what's really been big is the inability to really rest and practice, in the sense that taking a break from competing and fixing problems and developing new tactics. They haven't really had time to do this for a very, very long time. And that's really an issue. It's like when you play a tournament and something goes wrong, you don't really have a whole lot of time to fix that problem when you're playing your next tournament in 5 days. You can try to work on things a bit, but depending on your situation, like where you're staying, what accommodations you have at where you're staying, or just needing the sheer time to be able to look through demos properly for you and your opponents coming up. I mean, the thing is it's very hard to sit there and review all your own mistakes you need to fix whenever you're trying to scout for your opponents for the next event you're about to play in just a few days. So especially throughout July, they were getting these big second place finishes. No one was really getting time to analyze these things, and now they get that time to be able to kind of figure out what's going on and develop new things, scout better, look at their own problems. Because there have obviously been some big, gaping holes on this team. Mirage, Inferno in general, their Dust 2 CT side. There's different things here that need to be addressed that they haven't really had the time to do up until now. It seems like they've finally been able to get some time off to be able to look at things. And so I think that's a huge positive for the team, is just getting some rest, for one, but also having the time to actually prepare and practice properly and look over problems and try to address those issues. I think that's really big. So, what are some of the negatives for the team? I guess you could say lately. For one, there's been some individual performances that have been a bit inconsistent. When you look at some of their most recent events, I won't include the land in Australia because I don't have any data from that, but I've heard some different issues with players at that particular event. But you look at Cologne, or whenever they're playing VP on Cobble, after all playing really well against Mouse Sports, they're going to the next thing against Cobble, and no one really plays particularly well in that particular game. And then when you look at their biggest game, the huge upset, whenever they lose to King on Dust 2, I mean, Shroud's just completely missing this game. This has happened a couple of times where that's a guy they really rely on to be kind of a secondary star on the scene next to Skadoodle, and they really miss it. They really miss him when he's not having good numbers. Nothing also didn't really play so well in this game on King 1 on Dust 2, and so that hurts. Like, this team, part of its success I talked about was this big fragging trio of nothing, Shroud, and Skadoodle, especially Skadoodle. I mean, he hardly ever has a bad game, it seems, where sometimes you do see Shroud or nothing have an issue. However, usually Freakazoid, when one of those guys is not having such a good game, usually he can kind of step up and have a good game, and so you still have kind of three decent fraggers. But if you had like two guys completely missing, that really hurts this team. And so if you have a game where Shroud's off and on top of that someone else is also having an off game, like nothing or something, that's really going to just hurt this team's fragging ability. Because we all know that Sean isn't going to be a main fragging force for this team. He does have some games where he does really frag pretty well, but that should never need to happen. His primary objective is to be a great IGL for this team, which he is. And so that means that you kind of have to have the other four guys fragging, or at least three of those four. And so if you have two off out of the four, that really hurts this team. And so this is just one occasion where this has come up. You can look at their Dust 2 game against NIP at Dubai. Something kind of similar happens here. Not to the same extent as it was against King 1 on Dust 2 in Cologne, but some of this still does kind of happen in Dubai as well. Even when they were playing against Rocket to qualify for Cluj, Shroud had a pretty off game on Dust 2 in this particular series, though it didn't matter. Like, nothing and Skadoodle were both really solid. It didn't really matter. And while Shroud was off on Dust 2, he played really well on Cash. So it's like in this best of three, they played two maps. He's off one map, he's on the other map. This happened as well against Dignitas, too, with Shroud. He was good on Cash, or maybe it was Inferno, but he was particularly off on the other map. I think it was he played really good on Inferno in this series against Dignitas, but was really off on Cash. And so you can't really have that happen. I mean, you can't have one game where he almost drops to 30 and another game where he drops like 11. I'd almost rather him just consistently play in the high teens at that point, you know. But there is some inconsistency here with player performance that can be noted. And it's not just Shroud. I think that's just the one you notice the most because he's kind of supposed to be the star player for the team. And so you really notice when he's having some inconsistency issues. But nothing has them at times, and so does Freakazoid. So this is something that kind of plagues this team at times. It's just individual performances not really being up to snuff when they need to be, especially in some critical games. Some of these elimination matches on Dust 2 has really hurt this team on individual performances, but it's not even just individual performances as much as just the play style of the team in this particular situation. So I'll bring that up. We've already talked about how the results just have been dropping off. The results aren't as good as what they were back in July. They're at Cologne, they once again failed to make it out of groups. At Dubai, they don't win a map. They only play two, kind of unforgiving. And then obviously the big loss to Immunity in Australia was very disappointing. Though again, I don't want to comment on too much because I didn't get to see it or get any information from it. And then even, like I said, some recent losses in NA to Conquest and Liquid. But I will say, when it comes to NA results, they're still overall fine. I mean, they're 9-3 in ESCA, they're second place. And you can also note that in the deeper history of some of these players on this team, they've always had a knack for, at times, having like really rough online results in NA, but always being the better team on LAN, or always being the better team against international teams on LAN, like either way. So I wouldn't really read too much into that. Maybe later on in the future, a few months from now, if we see like they've completely fallen off, we might be able to look back at some of these recent NA results and stuff and be able to say, oh, that's where we really kind of saw them begin to decline. But at this point, there's no sense in reading too much into it. Some other cons for this team possibly would be their map pool. Like, obviously, Mirage and Inferno are still a huge problem. You need to fix one of those, in my opinion. I think their Inferno CT side has gotten a bit better at times, but then we also saw them kind of falter against Liquid on Inferno here pretty recently. But I think that map has still gotten better in comparison to like way in the past. I think their CT side has improved a bit, but T side still certainly struggles in that map, and we still have seen issues with their CT side at times. Their Mirage, yeah, they had that big one against Fnatic from heavy anti-stratting, but then you saw what happened when they played TSM. They got completely crushed, and historically Mirage has always been a pretty bad map for them, one of their most common bans. And the problem is like, that's totally fine when you're playing a best of one, you have multiple vetoes, you just get rid of both those maps, and you play the other maps pretty good, no big deal. But when you're playing a best of three, if they can get to that stage in this major, you're not going to be able to get rid of both. In fact, you're almost guaranteed going to play one of them. Whichever one you leave on the board, your opponent is likely going to pick, just because they know how weak you are on that map. So if they have any type of capability, which if you're getting to the top 8 of a tournament, you're likely going to be facing teams that have that capability, are going to be able to almost take that map away from you every single time. And you're going to have to rely on the other two maps to get through the series. And I think that hopefully with this time off, they've been working on one of the two to try to fix it. I would also add to that, though, outside of those two maps, their Dust 2 CT side has been really, really rough. It caused them to have trouble against Mouse Sports at the CEVO Season 7 finals. So they gave up a game against Mouse. They had like a big lead. I think it was like 10-5 after their T side in the first half, or 9-6, something like that. They had 9 or 10 rounds coming from their T side in the first half, the second half, but couldn't close out the game on CT. This happens again at Cologne against King 1 on Dust 2. They have a big lead on their T side in the first half. They come to the second half. They can't close out in the game on CT side. This happens a third time at Dubai against NIP. They have a big lead after the first half from their T side, swap over to the CT side, can't close the game. So that's 3 times where twice they've gotten eliminated from a tournament. but also it hurt, their semifinal seeding, so to speak, at season 7 finals for SIVO. So this is really big that this has continued to kind of haunt them. I would say they had a pretty good CT side Dust 2 against Rocket in the qualification stages for Cluj, but I mean, that was a much weaker opponent. So when they've played against better opponents, they've really struggled on their CT side Dust 2. Most of it is struggling with mid to B hits, which I think is just like one of the hardest things to do on CT side CSGO is deal with mid to B on Dust 2, as well as having all your other bases covered across the map. I know D2 is one of the harder CT maps in general, so it does make sense that this would be one of their struggles. I think it's something that a lot of teams actually struggle with. But I think part of it has been the predictability, kind of always knowing where Freakazoid's going to be has been a big problem. I think they trying to move around Skadoodle's op a bit. You always know where he's going to be, so you can try to throw some flashes and stuff to counter him. And I have seen in some of these Dust 2 games where Skadoodle's really struggled at a position that is so crucial to defend the A side, having that op on the corner, and he struggled with that a little bit. Despite the fact that he's consistently played pretty well and he's this really star opper for the team, this is a particular position where he seems to have struggled. So yeah, I think those are a couple of factors that play into it. I have seen them in some of their most recent games moving Skadoodle's op around, like opping the back of B at times. So I have seen them trying. I've seen them even make some aggressive cat plays. So they seem to start. They seem to have begun to make their CT side D2 a bit more dynamic, but I don't know if it's still quite there yet. But that seems to be like kind of another issue. So I don't want to drag on too long here. Basically, we all know that Cloud9's most recent results have been a bit disappointing compared to their big run in July. But, to kind of sum it up, I think that the building blocks that they use to have that success still exist on this team. They still do have some really good players in their particular roles, especially Skadoodle, Shroud. He's still a very good rifler. It's just some player individual performance consistency issues that are there. But again, they still do have all the tools that they had in the past to be successful are still present. And so that's good for the team. They've had some time off to really practice and prep this time around to really make sure that they're ready and they're rested and all that good stuff. So that's going to be good as well. But again, we already mentioned there still might be some issues with their map pool. There still might be some inconsistency issues, but we just have to see if the time off and the ability to prep is going to be able to override some of these cons, and if Cloud9 can get back to using these tools that they were so successful with in the past again properly to be able to be successful in the present and finally make it out of a group at a major, as it has been some time since they've been able to do so. And so we'll just leave it at that. I hope this has been a good video for you guys. Be sure to follow and subscribe for more. Thanks a lot.